This episode is going to look at the Greek historian Herodotus, who's often referred to as the father of history, a title given to him both by ancient writers and by writers of history today. This is due to his crowning achievement, a series of books entitled The Histories. The word history comes from the ancient Greek word historia, which means inquiry or investigation. It was only after Herodotus' time that the word became specifically related to the study of the past, which is why his works covers much more than just past events. In fact, he leaves us with a detailed description of the various peoples of the known world at that time, their societies, their stories, and even the lands they lived in. Herodotus lived in the 5th century BC, during what historians refer to as the classical era of Greek history, which lasted from 510 to 323 BC. Ancient sources put the date of his birth somewhere around 480 BC, just after the Greek and Persian Wars, the most prominent event of that period. By that time, the Greeks had colonised around the Mediterranean, from Sicily, South Italy, across the Aegean as far as the Black Sea, and even in parts of North Africa. These colonies were normally independent towns and cities. However, a number of them, particularly on the coast of Ionia, which is modern-day Turkey, had become subject to the ever-expanding Persian Empire. And this was the case for Herodotus' hometown, Halicarnassus. He was a Greek living under the yoke of the Persian Empire, giving him direct access to both cultures. Within his inquiries, Herodotus reveals that he is well travelled, from Italy, Greece, and the Black Sea to Phoenicia, Egypt, and even possibly Libya and Babylon. If Herodotus really did travel this extensively, then many have argued that he was an aristocrat, a member of the upper class. There is a number of reasons behind this conclusion. The first is money. He would have needed to afford the travel costs. More than that, this was a dangerous world. He would have needed to afford some sort of protection. On top of that, he would have needed to employ or buy interpreters to help him carry out his studies. The cost of all this was far more than the average man could afford. The second reason was that he was able to read and write to a very high degree. He was well tutored in a largely illiterate world. And thirdly was that in order to write such an extensive, well-researched piece of work, Herodotus would have needed the time to do it. The vast majority of people would simply be too busy earning a living to have completed this task. So let's look at his work. The structure of Herodotus' writings follows the expansion of the Persian Empire, then looking at the lands they either conquered or came into contact with, before focusing on the Greek and Persian Wars. Because of this structure, reading his books can sometimes feel like he jumps around from subject to subject, as he tries to include all the various lands and societies that inhabit his world, whilst he continues along the main topic. This does, however, leave the reader with a vivid impression of how the Greeks of the 5th century BC saw their world. His accounts vary from fairly accurate descriptions of historical events, such as military campaigns for example, listing who the commanders were, the strategies they used, the types of soldiers within the armies, and the landscapes of the battlefields they fought on. He also includes within his histories what we might consider today to be legend or folklore, such as the tribe of dog-headed people that live in Africa. This leaves the modern reader with a mix of rich source information about real events, as well as an insight into the very minds of the people that inhabited this world. The main topic, however, which all his histories lead to, is the war between the Greeks and the Persians, which as far as the Greeks at that time were concerned, was the biggest, most epic event of their era. Herodotus, however, is famous for the methods he used. Of course, he made use of written material where available, but also his own observations taken on his many travels. Much of his source information was based on oral inquiries. Today we might call it questioning or interviews. When assessing an event, he would try to record multiple perspectives, asking the various peoples involved. Therefore, when reading his work, you will often read, "The Athenians say this," or "The Persians say that," or "The Egyptians say this." By giving his readers multiple versions of events, Herodotus gives them the opportunity to decide for themselves which version they choose to believe. The ancient Greeks regarded mythology as history, and the epic poems written before Herodotus' time, such as Homer's Iliad for example, were considered to be real history. In these stories, the gods played a physically active role in the events described, as if they were real historical characters. Herodotus' histories, however, do not explain events in this way. This is not because he didn't believe the gods had a role to play, quite the opposite. He clearly demonstrates his belief in prophecies interpreted by oracles and dreams sent by the gods. He believed in fate. But his aims, as he states, was to record human achievements, so they were not forgotten in time. Therefore, his histories follows the human experience. Human actions and reactions followed by causation explains the events he records. As far as he was concerned, whatever was happening with the gods could only be recorded in cryptic prophecies told by oracles or interpreted dreams. Another theme we see in his works is that he clearly believes power is fluid, not permanently fixed, as he quotes, "Cities which were once great are small today, and those which were once small are great in my own time." Herodotus was well aware that empires of the past, such as Babylon, Egypt, Syria, Babylon again, had all risen and fallen only to be replaced by the Persians in his own time. As he puts it, "Jealous gods bring down to size those who are great." And although ultimately he believed the constant rise and fall of empires was influenced by the gods, he tells this story in terms of human achievements and failures. So, as he records the story of the Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful in history at that time, their defeat at the hands of a bunch of small independent Greek city-states, for Herodotus this was the natural order of things, because the Persian Empire, like previous empires, will inevitably fall, and this defeat was a sign of things to come. So what of his legacy? Well, this can be measured by how we remember him today, as the father of history. His aim was to record human achievements through multiple perspectives with a hint of skepticism without bias. And following his example, this is what historians still strive to do today, more than 2,500 years after his time. And his books have left us with a valuable record of his world, the people that lived in it, and an insight into the workings of their minds.